Okay, so now let's start with the theory of development, and this is the modernist theory. This is the only theory that we are going to discuss as far as this video is concerned. And so, modernization theory builds on the various theories that we've already discussed. And if you haven't watched the previous videos, you can go and watch them related to Comte, related to Marx, related to Weber, and of course, the modernization theory builds on these various theories throughout the world. When there was uh, there was the development of communism, and especially after 1945, there was simultaneous development of communism in, let's say, half the world. Half the world was divided into two camps at the time, from 1945 onward up until 1991. And one camp, the east, was called the red camp or the communist camp, and they were anti-capitalists. And then there were the capitalists, and then there were various leaders. The most outstanding of them, of course, was Churchill, who spoke a lot against communism, and thereby started the what is now called the Cold War, and the long forgotten Cold War now. And he said a lot of things, and that were against communism, and of course its watered down version was socialism. So there was a lot of things he said, and he basically convinced the Western, what was called the Western Hemisphere at the time, to not to accept the domination of the communists. And his favorite, the one of my most favorite lines or quotes that he gave the world was that the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings, and the inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of misery. And if you see this misery, this is a picture from North Korea, which is a communist country, and where there's a lot of suffering, a lot of children are dying. Of course, it's also because of the sanctions and all the economic problems which have been imposed by the outside world. But nonetheless, communism is, as Churchill said, there's an equal sharing of misery in these societies. So now Weber also we have discussed, and you can watch the video. The modernists believe that development takes place in phases. It's cumulative. The development that takes place in one point in time, then at another point in time, the development that takes place, it is added to the development that took place in the previous era. Most importantly, this is linear, which means you cannot go to one stage until you have crossed the first stage. You can't go to stage two until you have crossed the first stage. So let's very quickly look at the stages of growth. And this theory of development comes from a sociologist called Rostov. Um, he says that firstly, countries are in the what he called the traditional stage. The traditional stage is very close to what Comte had said. Religion, things were explained, things are explained using religion, magic, or superstition of some sort. It's more like the theological stage that Comte spoke of. And the economy is agricultural mostly at this stage, and there are rigid bureaucracies. So this is traditional kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is before oil was discovered. They used to live this way in the desert. And Arabia, the peninsula of Arabia, has some very harsh conditions. It's full of sand and sand and sand and desert and desert and desert. So this is how they used to live. Later on comes some preconditions for takeoff, and then the takeoff means you are going to move towards development. So this is not development yet. You haven't started the development. But when people start to trade, or they take aid with a view to developing themselves, with the ultimate purpose of developing themselves, the preconditions of takeoff towards development are now in place. So trade, very important. Also aid, Total development cannot come with aid only. It has to be with industry and trade and stuff like that. But nonetheless, if aid is taken with the purpose of trying to develop, then this is a precondition towards development. Also, some scientific ideas begin to develop. Some technologies are introduced from developed societies. They may not be indigenous, endemic, um, technologies which develop in these countries. They can be borrowed from the developed countries. Like this, for example, is a picture of the now forgotten Hijaz Railway, which was built by the Ottoman Empire towards its, towards its last 2 decades. But this was a mega project. It was supposed to extend from Medina to Damascus in Syria. So, and it was built over a very long period of time. I think it was built over 12 or 15 years. So, this was a precondition for development. This technology came from Germany. It was not indigenous to the Ottomans, to the empire, to Turkey. But it nonetheless showed that there was a precondition. The preconditions for takeoff are being met, and also some small scale industries are introduced, what is called proto industrialization. Home based industries are introduced at this stage. Countries start looking for things that they can trade, find in their mines, find in their land. Like looking for diamonds, in if South Africans are looking for diamonds, and this of course is Elizabeth Taylor. She was a diamond collector, apart from being a number one actress. So they find these diamonds in their mines, and they export them to the Western countries. And this is, for Africa, it was a precondition for development. But precondition for takeoff or precondition for development does not necessarily mean that you will succeed in developing. Many African countries reached this second stage, but they were not able to develop. And precondition for development can also be political. Okay, but a certain political class emerges, like in the 1960s in Pakistan. There was precondition for development. A ruling class, a stable ruling class emerged. I'm not suggesting that democracy was present in the country. That's not what I'm suggesting. All I'm suggesting is that the preconditions for the development were there. The Pakistan International Airline at the time was a very good airline. It was an airline which provided very good service, and the planes went to various destinations. This does not show development in itself, but it shows potential for future development. The emergence of a political class, the emergence of an economic class, who can later take the country towards what is called takeoff. Now, if these preconditions are used properly, the next stage is the takeoff stage. In the takeoff stage, productivity goes up. There is this takeoff. When we talk about takeoff, we're mainly looking at the economic side of society. Productivity, output of the country, output of the society, it expands, and it expands very, very rapidly. Industries come up, and that's what happened in many Asian countries, Pakistan, India, Iran. A lot of productivity happened, and profits became high. Industrialization took place in the 1990s. This is what we saw in China as well. In early 1990s, there was some movement towards very high levels of productivity, which China sustains till this day. China did not develop political and democratic institutions, but nonetheless, but take the example of Serbia. Serbia was a country which had no political institutions. They had a terrible civil war between 1991 and 1995, and these two people who are sitting here, they were the real butchers of the war. This is the president of Serbia. His name was Radovan Karadzic. But they had a terrible civil war, and a lot of killings of Muslims in Bosnia took place by the Serbs. But today, Serbia has developed. political institutions. It has an elected president. It's at peace with its neighbors. No problem at all there. So there has been good democratic transition, and this good democratic transition is a hallmark of maturity, of the takeoff stage. And then there's the drive towards maturity, where a wide range of goods and services, and now services are produced, not just goods. And these services, the money which is earned from the production of these services, is then used for the welfare of the people. That is very important, that the welfare of the general public, the welfare of the people, must increase. And this is what happens at this stage. Governments do governments do look after all sections of society, including, let's say, the disabled people. Services increase. And look for example at Turkey. uh, in the 1990s, Turkey was good in education, as far as education was concerned, but it has now consciously made education an export. It's a service. Education is a service, and they are producing it in surplus and exporting it. And then comes the last stage, which is maturity. Okay, this is not just in maturity, there is not just high production, but there's mass consumption. If you talk about the United States of America, which is the most mature economy in the world, America is one of the largest, not just producers of the world, it's also one of the largest consumers of the world. They produce everything, they consume everything. Okay, let's say roads. They build roads and they consume transport infrastructure. They're the largest consumers of transport infrastructure in the world. Look at their interstate system. So this is the age of high consumption, where societies reach a stage of maturity. And their products, Facebook is their product, it's an American product. Look at the level of consumption that is being facilitated through Facebook, and look at the consumption of Facebook itself. Everyone is using Facebook. So this is maturity, age of time of high mass consumption and mass production. And this mass production, please do keep this in mind, this mass production and mass consumption will take place both at the individual level and at the institutional level. Institutions will also become high consumers. That's why consumption is going to be so high. Imagine a government institution. Just imagine the number of the amount of stationery it orders. So it's going to order stationery in massive quantities. But the criticism of this modernist view of development is that it is not necessary that every country follows this pattern, this linear pattern of development. First you have to be at this stage, then at this stage, then at this stage. China probably went through all these stages in a linear fashion, but India did not. India started with trying to develop its service industry first. So it gives the impression that this is a very Western way of looking at development. That if you want to achieve development, you have to follow the Western model. That may not necessarily be true. Iran did not follow the Western model at all. It is not yet a developed country, but it has preconditions for development. So and it does not have purely Western style political institutions as well. China does not have Western style political institutions. So um, and the other criticism is, which we will look at in detail in the next video, is the criticism that this kind of development pattern, which starts with aid, it will lead to a lot of interference by those parties that are giving aid to the developing societies. All right, so thank you very much for this. We will look at this in detail in the next video.